Claudia, she was so precious and loved by Louis and tolerated by Lestat. In Anne Rice's book, Interview with the Vampire, she was a small, diminutive child, luring in her prey with her ability to appear sweet and innocent. In the movie, she was portrayed as an older child, almost a tween, whose thirst for blood surpassed that of even Lestat himself. In Interview with the Vampire television series, though, Claudia was cast as an underdeveloped teenager. Louis, suffering from a bout of guilt, rescued her from a burning building and begged Lestat to make her his daughter by turning her into a vampire. After all, Louis needed someone to love. This, especially when his business was destroyed and Storyville was burned to the ground. What Louis didn't understand was that when he turned Claudia into a vampire, he was in turn robbing her of her innocence and thus creating his own little sociopath. I have to admit, guys, I was never a big fan of Claudia. It was only when I went to go see Megan in theaters over the weekend is that I really began to understand her. For one, I'm not a huge fan of comedic horror or camp. I never got into the Chuckies or the movies like Annabelle. Those things just didn't interest me. However, when watching Megan, something clicked inside of me. I began to understand what the doll represented. Innocence. And of course, the doll turning into evil represents a child's innocence being stolen away. And that's really what Claudia was. She was a tiny, precious, innocent doll. In Interview with the Vampire film in 1992, Claudia was a small child. She was left to fend for herself after a plague killed her entire family. In AMC's version of Interview with a Vampire, Claudia was a mere teen, taken in by her aunt, and left to burn in an apartment building in Storyville. In both the book and in the television versions, Claudia was a child suffering from trauma. Louis, in his state of hunger, fed on the small girl in the movie. While Louis's rage in the TV series caused Claudia's entire neighborhood to be ransacked and burned to the ground. And that, my friends, is not only a recipe for disaster, but also a key ingredient in making a sociopath. You see, sociopaths, unlike psychopaths, are made. They are quote-unquote victims of their environment, and they are shaped from apathy, neglect, misfortune, and in many cases, abuse. They tend to hold on to their innocence for as long as possible. That is, until a major event or catastrophe knocks the wind out of their sails. It is at this point where the child understands that she will have to change to adapt to her environment, or they have to risk being destroyed by it. In many cases, these children behave very much like stray dogs, formulating into gangs to increase their chances of survival. They may resort to petty crimes, robbing and stealing just to survive. Many of these children don't have the structure, the guidance, or the protection of a parent or guardian. As a result of this, they develop a somewhat warped sense of how the world works, and of course, their position in it. In many cases, they remain childlike up until their adult years. They believe that the world is their oyster, and people are to be used, and sometimes abused, for their benefits. Sociopaths, much like narcissists, lack empathy. However, a narcissist will pretend to love people in exchange for respect and, of course, adoration. The sociopath, on the other hand, will leave you high and dry once they know that there is nothing in it for them, honey. The sociopath lives in the moment and really can't make the connection between how their erratic behavior adversely affects other people. As a result of this, they engage in petty crimes because they truly don't understand the consequences, or worse, they understand that they will not be punished for them. Now, with that said, you would think that Louis and Claudia's father and daughter relationship would be a match made in heaven. Sadly, it turned out to be a match made in hell. Claudia was 10 times more vicious than Lestat. She was petulant, throwing insane temper tantrums when she didn't get her way. Now, the young child known as Claudia from the 1992 version of Interview with a Vampire was cute and adorable, lovable even. This made her a master predator, in many cases, a somewhat likable baby vampire. Claudia from the television series was an annoying teen, always whining about how hungry she was. She could feed and never be full. I often wondered why the creators created such a dislikable character. Then I got it. You see, much like Lestat, Claudia had an insatiable appetite not just for blood, but for life itself. Lestat, both cursed and blessed with a dark gift, came alive when he was hunting and draining his victims of blood. Unlike Louis, and much like Claudia, Lestat was turned into a vampire against his will. His life and his innocence, so to speak, was stolen from him, and thus he was cursed to roam the world all alone. However, when Lestat fed, he felt alive again. The blood was giving him this intense feeling of nostalgia, giving him a chance to remember his early days, his youth, and of course, his days before he was cursed with the dark gift. Claudia also felt alive when draining people of their blood. Only for her, it was an intense intoxication that she truly couldn't understand. All she knew was that it was giving her pleasure. For once in her life, she was draining blood, she was cared for, she was even loved by Louis, and of course, tolerated by Lestat. But she too was looking for something that was stolen from her. Something that she could never recapture no matter how many bodies she drained or innocent people she killed. And this is when we see this little teenage vampire turn into a vicious sociopath. Sociopaths have a difficult time making real connections with people because they haven't matured enough to understand the gamut of human emotions that we all suffer through. Instead, they view people as pawns to be moved across the chessboard. For sociopaths, people are to be used and sadly abused. The only thing that matters to the sociopath is their own pleasure and their own personal gain. Now, it may seem like the sociopath and the narcissist are one and the same. However, there is one key difference that separates them. The sociopath can become self-aware. I think that's one of the reasons why the showrunners of Interview with the Vampire series decided to make Claudia a teenager and not a small child. They did this because they wanted Claudia to feel the repercussions of her actions. In the movie, also in the book and in the series, Claudia is reckless. In the series, she is reckless until she comes across another vampire who is incredibly cruel and appears to physically assault her in the woods by the bonfire. This is Claudia's turning point, where she realizes the harm that she has caused to others, and thus begins to understand the pain that she has inflicted upon others. For once, she truly understands Louis' position, because now she is equipped with the human emotion of empathy. In the movie, Claudia never understands these emotions, and thus robs Louis of his last bit of humanity, begging him to turn a woman into a vampire, all to save her from roaming the cold, dark world alone. In the series, Claudia has her own little character arc. In the movie, Claudia was Louis' life and proverbial death. I guess when it comes down to the narcissist and the sociopath, it's really a choice between the lesser of two evils. However, the sociopath is capable of self-awareness, empathy, and most importantly, redemption.